Welcome to EdUp Curriculum. I am your host, Nicole Poff, and today I am joined by a dear friend named Tommy Ray. I'm excited about this because we are going to be talking about a couple of things that, as instructional designers and people who design courses, they're topics that aren't always easy to navigate or push through. So, Tommy, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
My
Be-
pleasure.
Before we begin, can you just share with us a little bit more about yourself? What do you want the listeners to know about you and who you are?
Sure. Well, I've spent the last 30 years in organizational development and training, mostly in the area of leadership, management development, communication skills, sales training. And we work with companies to create custom learning for their people in those areas. So we spend a lot of time creating highly uh, highly specific programs for them and their company. And so this topic is really interesting, talking about working with subject matter experts, because we have to do a lot of it. So
We do. And, I feel like it's always kind of like a badge of honor that I'll see on LinkedIn, someone's like, oh, I just navigated a really tough SME relationship. And they wear it proudly because
Mhm.
we all know, A, that it's vital, but B, that it's hard sometimes. And so I'm excited to talk about this collaboration with SMEs. I think you have a lot of just expertise to bring to the table. And so for people who are listening who struggle kind of with this relationship aspect or how to navigate the course design, we're going to give you guys some good tips here. So let's kind of kick us off with what qualities make a SME effective in developing impactful training or curriculum?
So I think some of the qualities that we're looking for when we're working with SMEs is their ability to communicate the knowledge that they have at a very deep level, on a level where a beginner or someone who's just learning the skill, learning the topic area, can understand. So they have to be able to understand the beginner's mind and get into that, kind of step aside from, what we call the curse of knowledge. They know so much. Sometimes they want to go really deep. So those skills of being able to translate that into something that someone who's learning at an early stage of learning can really grasp is good. Someone who likes to collaborate with others, that's really important. Someone who's interested in learning and the learning process would be our great SMEs, because they can engage with the process. They want to learn about learning design, and that makes it easier to work with them as well. So those are some of the things I like to look for when we're working with SMEs.
Absolutely. And I think that's helpful from a SME perspective of how can I be a great SME for you as you're designing? What can I do to be great for you? And I think those are great tips. How do we balance though that SME, the deep expertise of the SME? Sometimes they're so deep in
Mhm.
that knowledge.
Yeah.
So how do we balance that deep expertise with making the content more accessible to the broader audience who may not be as deeply embedded in that content knowledge? How do we balance that?
I think part of it is maybe helping the SME understand the learning design process and being very clear and specific about the learning objectives that we're trying to achieve and accomplish as part of the training. And also helping them understand that when it comes to training, at least in our world of leadership and management development, communication skills, it's very practical. We want them to be able to engage in new and different behaviors. So we have to get from the theoretical to the behavioral. And that's a good way to help the SME balance the deep understanding. And I think the other thing is our own curiosity as designers. So I when I'm working with someone that's a SME on a topic that I'm not that well versed in, whether it's the actual subject matter or something about their company, I like to be curious. And even though we might not use what they share with us, asking those why questions, why do you do it that way? I think that brings this me to life a little bit too. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's critical from the design perspective that we ask those questions.
mhm.
During COVID, I helped some law schools bring their law content online, and
Mm,
I am not a lawyer, but man, did I learn a lot about appellate briefs and,
yeah.
all the things that I never thought I would ever know, but it was fun too, right? You're like, "I'm learning all these really nuanced things." Um, so let's move this into something a little bit more tactical.
Mhm.
Can you share, if you have one off the top of your head, a memorable example of maybe a SME instructional designer collaboration, and just what do you think made it successful?
So yeah, we were working on a project around business acumen with one of our clients. So the subject matter of business acumen is something that we know a little bit about, and but we didn't know was how they were applying some of these principles in their processes. So we needed a subject matter expert who could help us understand what business acumen meant for their company, for the people that we were going to be training. And because they were curious about how you learn business acumen, the relationship was really good because we were both learning at the same time. So it was a highly engaging, and they were also able to take us deep into some of their systems and processes that the learners knew a lot about. And so they helped us understand that so we could grasp the language, set up the scenarios so that they were really relevant for people. And it was a great collaboration because they were able to do that in a way that we understood and could translate into effective classroom-based learning.
Absolutely. Now, I think we've been focusing on, like, a great SME, right? How this looks positively, but I think an important part here is that we have to set this up. We have to make sure that this partnership is set up correctly. These
Mm,
these things don't just happen naturally, right?
yeah.
A SME doesn't come in ready to be a great SME. We, on the other side, set up this partnership to lead to success. So how can we do that? How can we successfully set up this partnership so that we get successful outcomes? Because it's not as easy as I think we're making it sound.
Yeah, there's no doubt the setting of expectations at the beginning of a project is really, really important, and I think it starts with time commitment. SMEs are busy. They're experts and they're they're busy, so really giving them a solid understanding of what's involved in the process is probably a great way to begin the expectation setting and really just asking, is this something that you think can fit into your schedule? Because you don't want to put additional pressure on them. They've got a lot of responsibilities. So just being clear about that is important. I think sometimes SMEs may not know the entire learning development process. I mean, I don't think we need to explain Addy to them in a very deep way, but we should be really clear about the design and development process and where we'll need them for reviews, things of that nature. So I think that's a good place to start. And also part of it is our own mindset as designers. We have to think of them as part of the team, not someone on the outside. They
Absolutely.
really are part of the team. So if you set up a team charter, if you're doing a project plan up front, it would be great to have them involved in that process as well. So they feel like they're part of the team.
Absolutely. Those kickoff calls, you, like, can't underestimate the kickoff calls. I've seen people where they're like, "I'm just gonna skip past this because I have an email," and I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. We we set the expectations, we build the relationships, we have
Right.
to have these kickoff calls." They are, in my mind, they are vital. Vital part of the success is that we hop on the phone and we establish expectations and relationship too, right? Oh, absolutely, yeah. I'm like, "Who's your kids? What are you doing this weekend?" Give me all the things, that connect us as humans, and
Yeah.
we'll get to all this other stuff, but I wanna hop on a call and say, "Hey, you went to Denver this weekend. How was it?" Right? That's a
Yeah.
much better way to start a call.
Indeed. They're part of the team.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, we're gonna talk about everyone's favorite thing right now, which is AI,
Yeah.
right? And I think in our world, there's there's excitement. There's
Mhm.
also a little bit of fear, right? There's fear of like, hey, sometimes I can put something through ChatGPT and it seems like it knows better than I do, or, so let's talk about that. How do you see the role of the SME evolving as our technology in AI and digital learning continues? Like, what does that SME relationship, or what does that SME involvement look
Yeah.
like?
So I think the first thing is ChatGPT is not going to give us the depth of knowledge about the company culture, about the learners, and that's a critical part of what a SME can provide as well. Obviously, we do our own discovery with other stakeholders, but the SME has a deep understanding of the organization and the people and the processes. So that's really important. Can it maybe alleviate some of the groundwork that you have to do with the SME if you're using AI well? Yeah, maybe it can. And so if it lightens their load a little bit, great. But we we can't rely on it. We have to have, SMEs check things if we are using any of the AI tools and coming up with relevant examples. I think SMEs are just better at that than AI at this point.
Absolutely. I
Yeah,
mean, AI will never know what happens at a water cooler, right? They'll never
right.
know what happens in the break room. They'll never know what happened 5 years ago at the company because it's not posted on Google. It's just
Yeah,
inside information.
right. And ChatGPT doesn't understand your client's customers. And SMEs provided great information about customers, whether they're internal or external.
Absolutely. And I tested this out because you and I talked about this. So I tested this out with ChatGPT. I help a lot of healthcare colleges. And so I know because my SMEs told me if your surgical tech students are going to interviews, they should be wearing scrubs, not professional clothes.
Mm.
But a SME told that to me. So I asked ChatGPT, hey, I'm sending surgical techs out to an interview. What should they wear? And ChatGPT told me they should dress professionally in
Mhm.
ties and suits. They gave me the
Yeah.
whole profession. ChatGPT did not tell me scrubs.
Mhm.
That's only knowledge that a SME can
Right.
can give. Um, and I'm like, this is perfect. This is a great example of something we talked about that a SME had given me that ChatGPT just totally missed.
Mhm. Yeah. I
Awesome.
like ChatGPT. It really very powerful for so many things, but the human connection in our work, in leadership development and management and communication, we're never going to get away from the human experience.
Absolutely. And that is a really good segue. The second part of today that we want to talk about, besides just collaboration with SMEs, which we've talked about now, was that changing behavior, right? Moving knowledge to action,
Mm.
behavioral change. I don't know if you know this about me, but I started as a behavioral therapist.
Really?
That was my first role out of college,
I
was
didn't
a
know that.
behavioral therapist working with parents of children with autism and just
Okay.
other delays, helping them change the environment, change, the things around how they
Mhm.
responded to their kids to help change their kids' behavior. So this is like Skinner is I have so many Skinner books on my bookshelf.
Huh?
So I'm excited to talk about behavioral change.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what you do in your world as well, specifically focusing on training.
Mhm.
I mean, that's kind of the goal, right? Is we want
Yeah,
behavioral change.
absolutely.
So let's walk this very systematically down. So what strategies, if we're wanting to move from knowledge to action, right?
Mhm.
What strategies do you use or like to use to design trainings that basically help transfer knowledge to real behavioral change?
Yeah. So it starts with thinking about that from the very beginning and asking, what does the learner need to do? Right? Not just what the learner needs to know, what do they actually have to do? And that sounds pretty easy, but it's not always that easy to really be clear about that. So starting there is critical. Then designing application exercises to give people the opportunity to try those new behaviors, whether it's asking questions in a consultative communication situation or providing feedback to a staff member, and giving them real situations that they can relate to. They're relevant and relatable, and giving them the opportunity to practice that and then give them feedback. So they have to get feedback no matter what any kind of skill that you're learning. You've got to get feedback, whether it's learning to play the piano or the violin or your golf swing, whatever it might be. You have to have that feedback. So we always have to build that feedback mechanism into the programs. And I think over the years, one of the things that I love to think about things and think deeply about them, but in the classroom, it really has to be, or whether it's live or virtual, practice, practice, practice. Lots of activity. So we start there.
Totally. And it
Yeah.
has to be meaningful. It can't be busy work. I
Right.
see a lot of busy work, right?
Yeah.
Lots of just do this because maybe
Yeah.
I did this in my training or maybe
Right.
I did this when I went to school.
Yeah.
But I like that you start with what skills do they actually need because that's
Right.
very different than knowledge.
Yeah.
You can have knowledge of how a company works, but you need to know how to do the things within the organization that you need to do.
Yeah. I really like one of the designers that I follow is Kathy Moore, and her
Mhm.
book Map It is an action mapping. It's just great for this very practical approach to really helping learners change some behavior and do that in the classroom. Yeah, I like that approach a lot.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
If listeners haven't read that book, it's a decent sized book. Probably one of it's not a day read, that's for
No.
sure.
No.
But I still reference that when you were on the phone the other day, Tommy.
Mhm.
I was like looking for it on my bookshelf.
Yeah.
Where's Gat? And I still can't find it. But really good book, and I think she points to very specific examples, in a hospital setting or business settings where just a simple PDF is not a sufficient way to change a behavior. Giving them something to sign that says, I'm not going to throw away, needles in the trash can. That's not going to change the behavior we want.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So again, taking this kind of into like a tactile way, can you think of an example where maybe a training that you designed successfully influenced behavioral change? Like, what does this actually look like?
Yeah, I think one of the areas where we see a lot of change is how managers coach their staff members and how they give them feedback. If people have never been trained on how to give good behavioral feedback that's very specific, that shares the impact of the behavior that someone is, engaging in, when we help people practice that and learn that skill, we really see a big difference because their staff responds differently to them. All of a sudden, they're they have more clarity about their their job and how they're performing. They have a better idea of what they need to do to continue things that they're doing really well or change behaviors to do something better on the job. And it provides them a lot of satisfaction, but it provides the manager a lot of satisfaction because they feel like they're providing value to their staff member. They're giving them good feedback, good guidance, they're more aligned. So when we give that kind of practice and exercises that people can work on and we see behavior change. The other thing about that, Nicole, is they get to apply it right away. That's a great skill that when you leave the classroom, you're probably going to have a performance conversation in the next couple days with one of your staff members. So it's not like you have to wait 4 weeks before you apply this new skill. You're applying it all the time and you're getting live feedback too on how well you're connecting, if that employee is changing their behavior. So it works well.
Absolutely. And I think the example you just shared feeds back into that designing the skills, designing what they need to be able to do, right?
Mhm.
Because if we just talked about that, if we just had them read a book about feedback or a PDF, of some sort of acronym of how to give feedback, that's not actually helping them, right? You can read a paper and then it goes in one ear and out the
Yeah.
other.
Yeah.
And I think in training settings, this happens a lot, but in higher ed, this definitely happens a lot, right? We
Mhm.
are like, here, read a chapter. And
Yeah.
on this chapter, that's going to be about feedback. And then they write about what they learned, but they're not actually practicing the art of giving feedback, right?
Yeah. Indeed. That's so critical. We do a lot of work with presentation skills as well. And that's all practice, right? You can think about your presentation, but the minute you have to get up in front of an audience when it's live, you've got to practice those. You've got to practice the skills that go into doing that well on a regular basis. And, so all of those things are important aspects of behavior change.
Absolutely. Now, keeping on behavioral change, what role does follow up play? Does it play a role in just making sure that the learners sustain the behavioral change? Let's talk about follow
Mhm.
up. What does that look like?
Yeah. So sustainment is a big topic for us in the corporate training world. Our clients are always asking, how do we sustain this learning? How do we avoid the one and done type of thing? So the couple things I think are involved in that. One is good design up front and maybe journey based learning where all you're thinking about those touch points going forward is really critical. Resources are good, but like you mentioned, we can give people follow-up articles to read and things, but one of the things that's been most successful for us is having what we call peer-to-peer conversations. So the training's over, but we are meeting several times, once every month for 6 months or so, and really talking about, "Hey, have you what have you tried? How's it working? What roadblocks have you had? What skills do you need refreshment on?" Those types of things, they seem to work really well also.
I love that.
But it's a really important part of corporate training.
Yeah. And it kind of keeps that accountability there, right? Of
Yeah.
not investing all this money into a training just for it to not be,
Yeah.
utilized after.
Right.
So that's a good accountability piece.
Yeah.
What is one thing that the learning industry could do better, you think, to support behavioral change in the workplace?
I think I've been getting a lot of requests for short trainings, an hour, 90 minutes. It's really hard to work with a group and have them try things, practice things, get the behavioral change they want in these really short sessions. So I think thinking about making the time investment necessary for real behavioral change is just going to protect their investment in in learning and training. So that would be certainly something that I would recommend. More time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's a great one. I hadn't thought
Yeah.
about that. And we see that on the higher ed side too, especially these like 5 week classes, 6 week classes. You're taking an entire course and squeezing in at 5 or 6 weeks. And so week one has like five different concepts. And you're like,
Yeah.
how is anyone going to learn all
Right.
five of these in 1 week?
Yeah.
Same thing for you guys.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Tommy, I didn't plan for you to answer this question, but we both have books behind us.
Uh-huh.
We're big like reaching for the books every time, you work with someone named Kathleen, and every time I'm on the phone with her, I'm like, Kathleen, there's this book. And she's like, oh, you and Tommy and your books. So I didn't prepare you for this question.
Okay.
Top two books. What are your two favorite books? If someone's listening right now, what books
Okay.
must they read?
So this is an old book, but it's one that I love in the business. The things that we work with people on is First Break All the Rules. The Gallup study on what people are expecting from managers and what separates great managers from others is still so relevant. And I've been seeing the statistics that Gallup continues to come out with at levels of misalignment, disengagement. We as managers and leaders have to do a better job. And that book points to so many of the things that we really need to think hard about as organizational development leaders and learning leaders when it comes to management. Uh, I'm looking here at, there's so many of these great books that I love. I do a lot of work in presentation skills, and I love all of Nancy Duarte's work.
Mm-hmm.
She Her books are awesome, and she can really help executives and any presenter, business or academic, take their message and get it into the space of an 18-minute TED talk or a 10-minute pitch, make it visually appealing. So I love her books as well.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
those are good ones.
Yeah.
And it's hard to pick too. I know that
Yes.
that's a because you're like me. I probably could be like, oh, can I? How about like a top 15?
Yeah.
If we do a top 15, maybe, and I could
Yeah.
maybe squeeze them to top. My husband was asking about that the other day. He's like, "What if you do like a top 10 books?" I'm like,
Yeah.
don't know that I could do a top 10.
I know. It's tough. That's one of the things I find the most frustrating is I just don't have enough time to read all the things I want to read. So of course I listen to a lot of books on from Audible and things like that, and that's helpful when driving or working out. But I wish I had more time to read.
Oh, me too. I wish I could
Yeah.
live in a cabin and read all day
Yeah.
long. I know when I used to commute to the office, that was the one thing I loved about sitting in traffic. Most people don't love traffic, but an hour of audible time, you
Yeah.
can get through books real fast.
Yeah. It's great.
Awesome. Okay, so I took us off track. I always do this. Um, we're gonna kind of ask some soft, fluffy questions now, just kind of closing us up. If you could give one piece of advice to someone starting a project that involves a SME,
Mhm.
so this would be more from the instructional designer, course developer point of view. They get to utilize the SME. What piece of advice would you give them?
Yeah. I think thing I would the piece of advice I would give is the concept of the beginner's mind and the curse of knowledge. Just kind of recognizing that, helping them recognize that they're so deep into what they do that we really have to be thinking about the person who does not have that experience, that depth of knowledge, and try to remember what it was like when you were learning that craft or that skill, whatever it is. That's probably a good piece of advice to start off with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What is I'm just gonna kind of go through some of these. What's the most surprising thing you've learned about driving behavioral change through training?
Yeah. People revert to old behaviors when they're nervous. So we see this in presentation skills a lot. You can work with someone and they're developing their skills, and then they have to go in front of an audience in a safe environment that we create, but they get nervous and they revert back to some of the things that you worked on. So if you've ever done any other type of performance when it comes to maybe playing an instrument in a concert or doing a solo concert or playing on an athletic team, when you're in the high pressure situation, we often revert back to some old habits. So I think that's something that I see as well in learning and training.
I think that's important because I think there's opportunity to call that out in the trainings, to call out, we're practicing this and you're going to know how to do this now, but when you're under pressure, be aware,
Yeah.
that this changes. When you were a kid, did you ever go through the DARE program?
No, no. I've heard of it, but I didn't go through it.
So it was originally designed when I was going through school, it
Mhm.
was designed by teachers.
Yeah.
And so it was say no to drugs, right? Say no to drugs everywhere. But they never actually taught us how to say no. It was just say no, say no, say no, say no. So then there was all these studies showing
Mm,
DARE was not very effective.
mm.
And so it actually then went under transformation by police officers who said, when kids are in these situations with their peers and with people they don't know, they need to practice those scenarios. They need to practice when they're under the pressure and they're feeling the peer pressure. We need to give them space to practice how to say no to drugs because just telling them, I mean, I'm sure you have the book Telling Isn't Training. just telling them isn't. And I think this kind of leads to your point here too, is like if a kid is facing peer pressure, they may have practiced this with their parents before, how to say no, but it's much different when you have your peers surrounding you.
Yeah, that's that's so important. It really is. I never went through that program, but both my wife and I have spent a lot of time in selling situations and things where we naturally have done a lot of role play practice. I was an actor, so I practiced and rehearsed over and over and over. And we did that at home with our son. We would always role play and practice. And, it, you know, it's super helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. One last question. Who or what inspires you most in the fields of training and curriculum development?
I think in terms of training, uh, I think I'm going to go back to Kathy Moore because I really like her. The other person as well is Ruth Colvin Clark. I don't know if you know are
Mm,
familiar with her work, but she's done a lot of work on the science of learning, um, evidence based learning. I think is actually the title of one of her books, and it's really good because it blows up a bunch of myths that you may get exposed to along the way, or even bad habits that you pick up as a designer. And I really like her stuff as well. So both of them, I think, have had a lot of influence on me, and I enjoy their work. They still inspire me when I read them or reread them.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I hadn't planned this question, so I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
How do you make sure you stay current in this field, with
Mhm.
with new
Yeah.
research coming out kind of all the time? What's kind of your best practices for someone who is in this field,
Mhm.
designing courses, designing curriculum? How do you stay current?
So in our space, there's a couple of good organizations. ATD, for example, Association for Talent Development, is great. You can always stay up on the latest the latest books and speakers in that area. I like to stay connected to my clients and what they're reading and what their challenges are. I like to follow McKinsey and their organization development, what they're thinking of. So some of the consulting firms, Deloitte, they're out there a lot working with clients on some of the bigger learning challenges. So I try to stay up on what they're thinking about as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
And
talking
do
to
you
people like you.
there you have it.
Yeah.
And now a lot of just because I've worked with you,
Mhm.
you work with a lot of companies who have very niche kind of areas beyond just business. Do you ever find yourself trying to stay relevant in that niche? So it's not learning and development, it's a totally different, it's like biotech and things like that. Do
Mm.
you ever find yourself trying to stay relevant there to stay connected to the work they're doing?
Yeah, I think that's really important, trying to just keep up with what's going on in their area. So we do a lot of work with life science clients. So just staying in touch with them. And sometimes it's just checking their website on a regular basis, reading their annual reports to get the kind of high level information we need to stay on top of what's going on in the industry and with them as well. Those things help a lot. I read the Wall Street Journal every day. So understanding what's happening at the again a high level, that helps. And then you find something that's really relevant, you can go and you can drill down and learn a little bit more about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Tommy, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your knowledge. I think working with SMEs, driving behavioral change, these are all really important topics. And I think we don't talk about them probably enough. We just assume that everyone who becomes an instructional designer or a trainer knows how to work with a SME, right? Or knows how to drive that behavioral change. But conversations like this, I think, help
Mm,
guide those designing in the
yeah.
right direction.
Hey, Nicole, before we go, I just had a thought that I want to share. Is the other thing that would be really helpful when working with SMEs is to bring them into the classroom and let them see what what's happening in the classroom. I think so much of what designers need to know, they can learn from actually watching what's happening in the classroom. And I think the same is true for SMEs. What sticks? What doesn't? Where are people confused? How do they respond to things? So I think
Absolutely.
that's valuable as well.
And I just remembered, we wanted to talk about, you have a white paper that's available for
Yeah,
people.
yeah, we do. We have a white paper. It's available on our website. It's called Unlocking the Power of Subject Matter Experts, a guide for L&D professionals. So
I am
anybody can
glad.
go out and grab that, where we can go in a little bit more detail than we did today.
Awesome. I'm glad I remembered that. Tommy, if you after this send me the link directly to that, I in the description notes will put a link.
Great.
So if you're listening to this, just look in the description. You'll see a note or a link of downloading that white paper.
Appreciate that.
I think that's a very helpful resource to kind of come full circle with today's conversation. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tommy. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Nicole. Great to be
Tommy
with
is
you.
on LinkedIn, so if anyone wants to connect, you can find him, Tommy, Ray, connect with him, shoot him a message. He'd
Yeah,
love to chat.
absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, Tommy.
Thanks, Nicole.